Okay, so why are we talking about prayer? So the story of the Parsha is Jacob is leaving Israel. He's escaping really his brother because he stole his twin brother's blessings. And he leaves Israel and is going toward the land of Haran, which is the birthplace of his mother. And I guess the birthplace of his grandfather, but that's another story. And the Torah says like this: he encountered the place and spent the night there because the sun had set. That is the description. So he shows up to a place and he goes to sleep because it's dark. And then he has a dream. And the dream is very encouraging. He sees a ladder. He sees angels going up and down. He has a promise. God tells him that God will protect him and bring him back to the land. And sure enough, he's there for 20 years, comes back 20 years later, large family, 4 wives, 11 sons, 1 daughter, tremendous amount of possessions. So that all happens beautifully. The word that the Torah says is Vayifka. He encountered the place. It's the second word of this week's Parsha. He encountered the place. What does encountered mean? So we have 2 interpretations. The first interpretation is, he meant to encounter the place, simple meaning. But the sages say, Rashi quotes the sages and says that encounter also could mean prayer. How do you know? Because if you look through the Bible, you'll see other instances, Rashi quotes Jeremiah chapter 7, and other places where that term, paga, refers to prayer. So the sages say that this teaches that Jacob instituted the evening prayer. We quote that from the Talmud and the Medrash. What are we saying here? We're saying that if you look at the Talmud and you ask the question, who instituted prayer and why was prayer instituted? So it's actually very interesting because there's really 2 sources. There's 2 separate sources. One source, which we'll start with, is the Medrash says that the Talmud says that Abraham instituted the morning prayer, Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer, and Jacob instituted the evening prayer. So you have the 3 patriarchs, each institute another prayer. Where do you see that? So at Isaac, it says, when he met Rebekah for the first time, the verse says, Isaac went to walk in the field, lasuach, to either to walk or to speak in the field toward the evening. And there, the word lasuach could mean also to pray. It's another word for prayer. And here you have the case of, and then we have the story of Abraham praying to God, which was in the morning. Isaac prays to God in the afternoon. And here, according to the sages, when it says he encountered the place, it means he prayed. By the way, the place happens to be, according to the sages, the place is the Temple Mountain, but that's another story. So that's the precedent. That's one of the sources that you know. That's one of the reasons why we pray 3 times, morning, afternoon, evening. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob each institute 1 prayer. Okay. There's another reason why we pray 3 times a day, and that is sort of another model of explaining it, and that is because in the times of the temple, we were supposed to bring a daily offering. And there's a commandment to bring a daily offering once in the morning and once at night, in the afternoon. So once the temple was destroyed, the sages instituted that instead of the prayer, we should have, instead of the offering, we should have a prayer. And that's why they instituted a prayer in the morning and the prayer in the afternoon, because it's a mitzvah to bring the offering in the morning and the afternoon. So why the final prayer? The final prayer was because if there were certain parts of the animal that were not offered during the day, you have a whole night to catch up. So that's why initially it wasn't an obligation. Later it became an obligation. So that's introduction. There's 2 reasons why we pray, either Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, or the prayers, or the offerings in the temple. By the way, this is off topic, but there was a beautiful interpretation that I once heard from Rabbi Steinsaltz, and he said like this. He says, if you look in Judaism, there are 2 types of synagogues that Jews like to build. So one is a grand temple, big building, impressive. You raise a lot of money, you put in big windows, you make it feel grand. That's one type of legitimate type of synagogue. Then he says there's another type of synagogue with the Hasidim would call a shtibel, like a little house. This, we're sitting in one right now. Another, it's homey, it's small, it's not grand. And there's two types of shuls. Why are there two types of synagogues? So he says because prayer is supposed to do two things. In other words, there's two tracks of prayer. There is a prayer that is like to remind us of the offerings in the temple. So it has to be grand, it has to be awe-inspiring. So you want a big building that when you walk in, you feel overwhelmed. But then there's the prayer, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They prayed to God, not in the temple. It was sort of a personal prayer. So when you have the small shul, that captures the homey feeling. You're talking to God like a child speaking to the parents. In other words, these two prayer really incorporates both. There's two ideas. And that's why we have two reasons, two sources for the prayer. Okay, but that's off topic. What I want to really talk about, what we're going to talk about tonight, is the question of evening. Jacob prays in the evening. And to think about the evening in Judaism is very confusing because unlike most normal people, when does the day end? Midnight. 12:01 is the new day. It's simple. The Jewish people, it's complicated. When does the day start? Day starts at sunset. For most matters, for other matters, it's not. What we're going to try to offer is show the complication. It's not so simple when the day starts, when the day ends. And then we're going to get to the mystical view of why we have multiple ways of counting time and why the question of where to place the evening is a very, very important question. And hopefully there'll be lessons to this for our life, but also for our understanding of the purpose of the creation, etc. So we have a lot to do. We're going to start from the question, a simple question. The start from the question is, when you think about the three prayers, do you put the evening, is evening prayer number 3, or is evening prayer number 1? Do you go evening, morning, and afternoon, or morning, evening, and afternoon? Why that's important, you will see in a minute why it's important and why it's relevant. But that's the question. In other words, does the third follow the first two? Or, I'm sorry, does the evening follow the first two? Or is it the first? Another way to ask the question, when you think about the night, are you putting the night after the day, which is the conventional way? We think of the morning. I wake up in the morning, afternoon, then I get to the night. Or do we do it the Jewish way, where the night before, the night precedes the day? So Shabbat starts Friday night, and from Friday night you go into Shabbat. So this is what we're dealing with. These are the pieces of the puzzle. We're going to try to put the pieces of the puzzle together and make some clarity. But before we do that, we're going to add some more confusion, because you need more ingredients in the pot to shake it up before we can put all the pieces together and get some clarity. Okay, I'm just going to pull up my notes here so I don't say something that's totally wrong. A little bit wrong is okay, but not totally wrong. Okay, let's make an argument for the morning prayer to be first. The order of prayer is morning, then goes afternoon, and then goes evening, and that's the way we think about time. So the argument for that, I could make multiple arguments. Number one is, we said Abraham instituted morning prayer, Isaac instituted the afternoon, and Jacob instituted the evening. Now, Abraham is obviously first, Isaac is second, and Jacob is third. So you see, that's the order. Okay. Another argument to say that it goes morning, afternoon, evening. In other words, the evening follows the morning. So another argument would be to say that if you're looking at the reason for the third prayer, the way it's established, we mentioned before, the way it's established in the temple. So there is no obligation to bring the evening offering. I mean, there's an obligation to bring the morning and afternoon, and evening is just if they did not finish doing the offerings of the day, then they can also do it at night. So the night is sort of the fill up is a spillover from the day. So the night is the continuation of the day. So that's an argument to say that the order of the prayers are morning, afternoon, evening. Okay, fine. Let's make the opposite argument, and let's make the argument that it's really evening. Evening is first. Okay, let's talk about add one point. If you look at the Mishnah is the book that gives the oral law, the explanation of the teachings of the Torah, the first written record of the law of the Torah. When the Mishnah introduces the law of prayer, what the Mishnah does is first asks, when do you pray in the morning? And only then, when do you pray in the evening? Again, morning first, evening is second. So that's the pattern. Okay. Now let's make an argument that it's the opposite. When it comes to, for example, the Shema, the same Mishnah, the first Mishnah says, when do you start the Shema at night? What time do you say the Shema at night? And the second Mishnah is, when do you start the Shema in the morning? In other words, if you're looking at the recitation of the Shema, which is part of prayer, you flip the order. First night, then morning. Another point, which is a little bit technical, but there's this whole discussion of what happens if somebody forgot to pray. I forgot to pray in the morning. So there is an option to pray the afternoon twice. To say the Amidah, say the afternoon prayer twice to fill in for the morning. So without getting into technicalities here, it seems from the language of the Talmud that would only work. That would only work if I skip the morning. If I skip the night, I could say twice in the morning. But if I skip the afternoon, I can't do twice at night, because the night is not a continuation from the afternoon. The night is the new day. See what I'm saying? So it seems like night, morning, afternoon is the order. And therefore, if I skip the night, I do 2 during the morning. If I skip the morning, I do 2 in the afternoon. But if I skip the afternoon, I shouldn't be able to do 2 at night, because the night is sort of the next day. It's a separate concept. Now, that's not the conclusion for another reason. But from that discussion, it seems like the night is the start of the new day. So to summarize, without getting confusing, now I'm going to hopefully try to, we have all the technical parts taken care of. Now we're going to look at the spiritual side. But to summarize, there's 2 ways you could think about the prayers, or really 2 days to think about the day. There's the day start at night, the way we do for Shabbat and holidays and many areas of Jewish law, where the day would start at night. Evening, morning, afternoon is one order. Or do we say that there are other indicators that the order of the prayers is morning, afternoon, evening? So where does the evening follow the day, or does the evening precede the day? That's the philosophical question, thinking about time. But again, hopefully we're going to move away from just remaining in the realm of philosophy, and we're going to make it practical. But so we're almost there. We're almost at the practical side. Go ahead, Vicky. Do you have a question?
Oh, sorry. I did raise my hand because I thought, but my question was already answered, because that's the most obvious reason, because the Jewish day starts at night, and I thought that the Talmud doesn't give that answer, but it does.
Yeah, but the Jewish day starts at night for some areas. It's like just okay. So you want a little bit of. We'll add a little bit more. One more minute. You'll allow me to be technical, and then we'll get to the spiritual side, which will clarify everything. So Vicky is right that in general we think of time as the night first and then the day. Why? What is the precedent? Why do we do that? The answer is because if you open up the first page of the Torah, when God creates the world, what does it say? First day. It says. It's very obvious. It says, "Vayi'era vayivoka yom echad," and it was evening and there was morning one day. And then it says about the second day, and it was evening and it was morning day 2. It was evening and it was morning day 3. So the Talmud says, if the Torah says there was evening and there was morning, then that means Bereshach and Aramaic for first darkness and then light. That's the pattern. So first darkness, then light, and therefore with almost all matters of Jewish law, the night precedes the day. Yom Kippur, the night precedes the day. Shabbat, the night precedes the day. Almost in every area, the night precedes the day. And the idea is we're following the pattern of creation. And in creation, this is the key phrase. We're going to get back to this. When it comes to matters of creation, the day follows the night. Night precedes the day. So that's clear. Forget about everything I said. Creation, till now, if it's confusing. When it comes to creation, the night precedes the day. First is night, then is day. Okay. However, when it comes to the temple service, then the order flips. Temple service, you have the night follows the day. So all the parts of the animal that were not being able to offer during the day, the morning and the afternoon, and all the other offerings that are offered during the day, those parts were offered at night. So in the way the Talmud puts it, Bekadshim, be talking about holy matters, meaning sacrifices, offerings in the temple. When it comes to Kadshim, when it comes to holy matters, the night follows the day. So if you put everything I said in the last 19 minutes, and you want to boil it down to very simple, you say there's two ways of thinking about time. When it comes to creation, first night, then day. When it comes to holiness, first day and then night. What does that mean? Why is that? Why are there two patterns? And of course, what's the relevance to us? That's the most important question. And that is what we're going to address hopefully in the next couple of minutes. But I just want to make sure that everybody is clear that I didn't put out too many details. In other words, that we have sort of, we see where we're going with this. Comes to creation, first day, first night, then day. When it comes to holiness, first day, then night. So it is interesting that we have two ways of thinking about time. I always say that the Jews are confusing with the only people that we have. For example, we have two New Years. We have Rosh Hashanah, which is the New Year, but it's only the New Year for the years. You talk about in the Bible, the month of Nisan, the month of Passover, is the first month. And it's supposed to be the first month, so it's the New Year's for the months. So we're the only people that have our New Year. If you think about it, the Torah says, you know when Rosh Hashanah is? The first of the 7th month. Because when you count months, you count the month of Passover to be first. My point is, we have multiple ways of counting time. Even a New Year, a simple question of when's your New Year, we have two New Years. Why? Because we understand that in this world, in time, there are multiple layers and there are different things happening simultaneously. And therefore, when you ask a question, what's first, night, day? The question is, in what context? What are you referring to? And because there's multiple things happening and everything has to be addressed by its own standards. So that is all the introduction. Now we could jump right in. Right? So far, so good? Okay. Okay, I just want to mention one thing, that when you say that Jacob prays in the evening prayer, it's not just a technicality. It's not just that he was at night, so he prayed. As we see in the story, Jacob's life, in some sense, was like the evening, comparison to his parents. He was the only patriarch who spent significant time outside of Israel. So he was in a spiritually dark space. And he was challenged, he was tricked by his uncle, who later becomes his father-in-law. And in general, he spent at least 20 years that were very difficult outside of Israel. When he came back to Israel and he thought he was going to live in peace, then he had other trouble, which is his favorite son, Joseph, was kidnapped and he thought it was killed. For many years, he was in mourning for that, another 22 years. So we're talking about a person that for 20 years lived in a hostile environment, physically and spiritually. Then when he comes back and he finally thought he's going to get some tranquility, he was parted from his beloved son for 22 years. At the end of his life, when he comes to Pharaoh, he tells Pharaoh, my days have been few and bad, and they did not come close to the days of my parents. So in other words, he lived in a very difficult situation. And when you say that Jacob prays at night, what you're really saying is the power of prayer, the encouragement that a person can get through prayer is not just dedicated to times of the day when the sun is shining, meaning mystically, figuratively, that you feel God's blessing. But even if a person is at night, Jacob tells us that you can pray to God even if you don't sense the presence of God. So Abraham prays in the morning. In the morning, it's very easy to sense the presence of God. Morning is light. And we mean the physical morning, but also the figurative morning when things are going well. So Abraham says, when things are going well, thank God, pray to God. Wonderful. What does Jacob show? Jacob shows the opposite part of the spectrum. Jacob says that even if you're at night, you don't sense the presence of God, but we believe that God is still here in the darkness. It's only dark because God is concealing, but God is present with us, and therefore we should and we could pray to God. So that's Jacob's contribution to the concept of prayer. Where do I sense God? Where do I feel close? Where do I feel God will listen to me? During the figurative daytime, when everything is going well, that's Abraham. Jacob says, even when things are difficult, you should know God is listening, God is present, and therefore pray to God then as well. So that's a big deal. It's not just a technical time. What time am I praying? Am I praying at 8 o'clock in the morning or 8 o'clock at night? The state of mind of the person praying is completely different. And that's Isaac's contribution. That's Jacob's contribution. Okay. Now let's get a little bit to the concept of what does it mean that how we think. There's two ways of thinking about time, and that there's two ways, and that when it comes to creation, night precedes the day. So let's start from there. When it comes to creation, first you have evening, then morning. Why? Creation is the physical world. The physical world, in the state of, what's the word I'm looking for? In the default state of creation, it's dark, meaning spiritually dark, right? Even physically, the raw material of the world is not organized, it's not order. The world is created as such that there is confusion. There is opportunity, but the opportunity has not been fulfilled. And then over time, what we do is we go from a state of darkness to a state of light, right? You figure out how to better the world. But the world in its default state is not positive, because first of all, it's not holy. It's just physical. And we live our life and we try to refine ourselves and make ourselves better people. But also in the practical sense, anything we have, we build a house, we plant a field, whatever we're doing, we're taking something that is in a state that is not perfect. We're taking the raw material and we're perfecting. So the world starts in a state of darkness, and then our task is to perfect it, both physically, but also spiritually. We start out in a place, the physical world is a place where you don't sense a connection to God, or that is not considered holy, but people, through their acts of goodness and kindness to the mitzvot, they actually bring light to the dark world. But I think it's true not only in the spiritual sense, also in the physical sense. Everything in this world, nothing is ready for you. You have to deal with the raw material, perfect the raw material, and then you could eat bread, and then you could eat the vegetable, but only because you did something. You improved on the world. So in other words, the world, when it comes to the physical world, we start in a state of darkness, and from the state of darkness, we perfect it to the state of good. And we do that both in the physical sense, also in the spiritual sense. Now we understand why we start the day. We think about time. We think about time as going back to creation, like Vicky said. In creation, that's the model. You start with the day and you go to the night. It starts with darkness, and after darkness, you make it holy. You perfect it. Like I said, both physically and spiritually. And that's that model that we understand. That's easy to explain, I think. What's your next question? The next question is, why in holiness is it the opposite? Why in holiness do we say the night follows the day? Okay, it reminds me of a joke. It's a true, I don't know if it's a true story. What's the joke? Oh, once upon a time, a father wakes up a kid in the middle of the night, and he says, son, I have to teach you a life lesson. Freezing outside. He says, we're going on a trip. He says, Dad, you're crazy. It's too cold. No, come with me. Come with me. And father takes a towel and a blanket, and he says, we're going out. They go out, they pull up, it's in the lake. Father takes the son, throws them into the water. The son is screaming, he says, oi, it's so cold. Father pulls the kid out, wraps him in a towel, puts him in the blanket, gives him a cup of hot cocoa, and the kid says, ah. And the father says, that's the lesson. He says, in life, there's always an oi and an ah. Question is, what happens first? Hopefully, first you have oi, first it's difficult, and then you get the pleasure. But there are other matters in life that in the moment they're pleasurable, but then later you get the oi. So he says the lesson is start with the dark and move to the night, move to the light, not the other way around. So that's the joke, but that's what we're saying about the world. The world is a dark place. Default, it's a dark place. It has hospitable to the human being, both physically and spiritually. right? You can't just expect to be born on everything. And in other words, the human being has no expectation. If you're in the jungle, you're not going to be able to survive. You have to do things to create civilization, to create a habitat, to create a space where you could survive. So it's true physically, but it's also true spiritually. Default position of the world is that people don't sense the holiness. We're talking about the realm where the world is unholy. What we do is we bring light to the darkness. I guess when the month of Hanukkah, that's the theme of Hanukkah, light up the night. And that's what we do in our life every day. We have a place that's not spiritually developed, and we bring spirituality to that place. And that's why when it comes to creation, first night, then day. That I understand. The question becomes, why the opposite? Why, when it comes to holiness, do we say that night follows the day? And therefore, if you're bringing an offering in the temple and you brought it today, today's Wednesday, you brought it today, you can offer it today, the whole day. And if they didn't finish offering it during the day, they could also offer it tonight. In other words, the leftover parts they can offer tonight. But tomorrow, oh no, tomorrow's a separate day. And like I said, when it comes to holy matters, the night follows the day. Why? If we're moving from a state of darkness to light, and that's the pattern of the world, why is it reversed in the holiness? That sounds counterintuitive. So to explain that, we're going to have to just make a little bit of adjustment to what we mean by night, and everything will fit into place. But so far, so good. If anyone has any comments or questions, please raise them so we know that we're on the same. We know that we're on the same page. Okay. When it comes to holy matters, we start with the day. Why? Because holy matters are considered, figuratively speaking, light. You're doing a mitzvah. You're in the realm you're in the realm of light. So if you're doing a mitzvah, you're the realm of light. So then light day comes first. After the day, you get to the dark. But here, the dark is not negative. Here, the dark is greater than the light. What do you mean? Then a lot of times the Kabbalah is counterintuitive. How could darkness be greater than light? So, well, the way the Kabbalah is going to say that is as follows. When something is too great, too overwhelming, I don't understand it, then for me it's dark. Not because it's negative, but it's because it transcends, it's too powerful for me to be able to understand. So for example, if I'm a child and I'm in the first grade and my teacher comes and teaches me some wisdom. So I have light. I've been enlightened. I have wisdom. What happens if the person comes into my class, is a great professor, and he starts talking right way over my head, ideas that are too great for me to be able to understand. So maybe objectively that's greater light, but for me, it's too much. And if it's too much, I don't sense it as light because it's more than I can understand. So in other words, when you think about light from the Kabbalistic perspective, light means the connection to God that I could perceive and I could understand. But that's not the essence. The essence of God is beyond me. The essence of God I cannot understand. You cannot grasp God. So in that sense, God is in the dark. Dark is not an absence of light, but dark is greater than light. And that's what we're saying. When it comes to holiness, we begin with the realm of light that we could understand. But then we have to get to the point where we sense that God is beyond us. We really have no understanding. And that's the darkness that follows the light. Not that it's lesser than the light, it's greater than the light. So now just to summarize, so we're saying as follows. We're saying when it comes to matters of the world, when we're dealing with the world, when it comes to the world, the physical parts of the world, we start with darkness because we start with a place of confusion. We start in a place that we don't sense spirituality. We start with a place that is undeveloped. And our job is to move from day to night. Our job is to move, from night to day. Our job is to move from darkness and bring light into our existence, which is the physical world, and our own consciousness, which starts out as negative, and then we add and we refine it and make it more holy. When it comes to holiness, however, we're moving from light to day because we're starting from matters that are holy. And then we get to the part that we understand that God is beyond our ability to understand. If it's beyond our ability to understand, it's like darkness. So that's why we have a completely different model, whereas the night follows the day. So we're almost done. We just take Vicky's question. And then what we're going to do is we're going to show that in prayer, we're doing both things at once. And therefore, both models exist within prayer, because there's two ways to think about prayer. So that's the final leg of our journey. So we'll take us another few minutes. We'll take the question. We'll hopefully discuss it a little bit, and then we'll conclude and summarize, and hopefully I'll figure out how this will make us better people, because that's why we're here. We're not just here because it's interesting, which it is, but we're also here to figure out how to bring more light into our life. Go ahead, Vicky, please.
Oh, thank you, Rabbi. Actually, my question was about that, how in the darkness that it kind of intersects, both intersect, because in the darkness that is physical, there is that ray of light that we probably have to try to understand in order for us to understand that that's a concealment darkness.
Right. So you're basically saying that both darknesses are both called dark because in some sense they're both related, and in some sense, when I have physical darkness in my life, when I have the negative darkness in my life, the negative darkness is actually an opportunity to connect to the darkness that transcends the light. In other words, when things are so bad and they don't make any sense, I have no choice but to connect to the deeper truth. So that's a powerful concept. Yeah, that's true. That is true. But that's really the third step. That's really the step that is not in this essay of the Rebbe, but I'm sure that if I look at the footnotes, we'll find some reference to that. So that you're running one step ahead. Okay, so what you're saying is true. Not that it's not true, but it's very true. But that's even a deeper understanding. So let's tie all this together. If I'm thinking about the physical world, I start with darkness, move to light, because this beginning, as I'm not connected to God, I don't necessarily naturally sense spirituality. Naturally, I think about what's immediate gratification. That's natural, and then I try to refine myself and move to a place where I'm more sensitive to spirituality, where I open up to spirituality. I move from night to day. That's if I'm in the physical world. If I'm in the spiritual realm, in other words, if I'm dealing with a mitzvah, if I'm dealing with holiness, I start with something that is holy. Obviously, the awareness of God is present, so the light is there. And then I say, however, there's something beyond that. There are things beyond that I can understand. So I have to be humble and realize that there's so much beyond me because God is infinite. Okay. When I'm praying, which one am I in? Am I in the realm of the physical world, or am I in the realm of holiness? This is a trick question. The reason why it's a trick question is because praying is both. I have two parts of me that are praying. So this relates to the Tanya class, because you have two souls. When I'm coming to pray, there's two parts of me. There's the animal soul. The animal soul is natural. So from the animal soul's perspective, I'm starting out from a place of darkness. And hopefully, as I finish praying, as I continue to pray, I'm becoming more and more aware of holiness. I'm becoming more and more aware of spirituality. So I'm moving from dark to light. That's the animal soul in me. That's the journey of the animal soul. The godly soul is having a different journey. The godly soul, when it comes to pray, all of a sudden it says, wow, here, prayer. When I was eating and drinking and sleeping and exercising and working, then it wasn't my natural self. Finally, I have some light. Finally, I could think about God. Finally, I have some area where I could express myself, my natural self, which is holy. The godly soul, so prayer is refining the animal soul, but also finding expression for the godly soul. And if we're looking at the godly soul moves from a place where it feels a connection to God to the deeper understanding that God is transcendent and way beyond it. So in short, the reason why prayer has both angles. On one hand, if you look at prayer, you would say, when it comes to prayer, the night precedes the day. In other areas, when it comes to prayer, the day precedes the night, is because when we're praying, there are two things happening simultaneously. We're dealing with our natural self, with the animal soul. And from that angle, we start with the night. We start with a place of confusion. We start with a place of unholiness. And then our job is to increase and bring more light. But prayer is also the place where we express our godly soul. And with our godly soul, we start out with day. Everything is bright, feels connection to God. We move to a state of darkness, to the understanding that there are things that are beyond our capacity to understand. So why is prayer so confusing? Why can't we figure out if that day precedes the night or follows the night? The answer is because there are two cycles, two things are happening. when I pray, every time I pray, there are two things happening simultaneously. I'm trying to refine the more natural parts of self, and therefore I move from night to day. I'm also trying to find expression for my soul. And in that area, I'm moving from day to night. So the awareness that prayer is a multifaceted experience because there are two things happening at once. I'm refining my animal soul and finding expression for my godly soul. Each views time differently because the starting point for the animal soul is different than the starting point of the godly soul. So that's the story in short. A lot more to say, but I think it's at least enough to get us to give us a little taste. I hope this was interesting, and we should meet each other in good health as always. Go ahead, Vicky. Yes.
Oh, sorry for asking many questions.
No, questions are good. Questions are good.
Does it reflect, my first question is, does it reflect in the structure of the prayers in the morning at night? And my second question is, because Jacob instituted the evening prayer and he represents compassion, was there any thought been given to why?
Yeah, so the first question is a little harder to explain because the basic part of prayer, the ladder of prayer, so to speak, seems like it's more addressing the animal soul. We move from the simple to the complex. We move from the less spiritual to the more advanced spiritually. So we're going up. But I think that the lower rungs of prayer are more for the animal soul. The higher rungs of prayer are more for the godly soul. So at some point, the godly soul, the beginning of the prayer is sort of to get the animal soul on board. And then at a certain point, prayer is essentially about the godly soul. Like, for example, without getting into too technical, but the blessings of the Shema. So what precedes the Shema is we talk about the angels. And without getting into too many details, the angels are really talking about to our animalistic side, because the angels are the source of our animalistic side. And once we talk about the source of our animalistic side, once we communicate with our animalistic side, what's the next thing we say? Shema Yisrael, Hero Israel. And the Kabbalists say, Israel, oh, that's the godly soul. And we start saying things, God is one, that the animal soul won't necessarily feel. So at first, we're talking to our animal soul, then we talk to our godly soul. So you have to think about which part of prayer am I in and what am I addressing. But your point about compassion is very interesting, because that Kabbalistically, the idea of compassion is compassion could reach every person. So I talk about this in the past because I think this is absolutely fascinating. When it comes to love, for example, my love has a relatively small circle of people who are included in my love. There are 8 billion people on the planet as of, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, last month, we got 8 billion people. How many of those people do you love? You don't even know. You first of all, you have to know the person to love them. I can't love the unknown. I can't love someone who I don't know what they look like or who they are. I don't love. Love is a feeling of attachment. I can't feel attached to people that I don't know. So think about all the people that I know, very small percentage of the 8 billion. Of the people I know, unfortunately, not everybody do I love. Some people, maybe I have a few people that I love in my life. Okay, beautiful. So the circle of love is very narrow. Compassion is very different. My compassion is broad and across the board. How do I know? I could be driving on the highway, and all of a sudden I see a person crashed, and I see a person's in pain. Today's a bad day. I saw 4 accidents from here to Muncie. I don't know, maybe it's cloudy, so I don't know. So someone is in pain. I don't have to know who he is. I don't have to know if it's a he or she, nationality, age, wealth status. I don't have to know anything. Someone is suffering. Naturally, your compassion is going to connect. That's the human condition. Someone is suffering. I don't really like the guy. I would never want to spend time with them, but they're in pain. Naturally, my compassion is going to be awakened, because compassion has a way of building bridges with anybody. That's the mystical idea of compassion. It's the third sephira, the middle sephira. Middle goes higher and lower. It's basically could reach everywhere. And that's the idea of Jacob. Jacob, the evening prayer could reach everywhere. Abraham could pray to God when it's light outside, when he senses God's presence. Jacob tells you that there is no place where you cannot pray to God. Even when it's dark, where you feel like it's distant, doesn't matter. Compassion could incorporate every place and everywhere. That's the attribute of compassion. In other words, the ability to connect. It's the attribute of truth. The truth could be found everywhere. So yes, Jacob's skill is to be able to find connection in every area, even in distant areas, even at night, even outside of Israel, which is, by the way, the metaphor of the ladder, which we'll talk about tomorrow. What is the ladder? The ladder is that wherever you may be, you're connected to heaven. right? So that ability to be able to connect two things that are distant. So Jacob's ability, unique ability, is to be able to sense that every place, even the place of darkness, can be transformed to light. And that's what he does in his lifetime. He is in the story, he's very distant, he's in a challenging place, but in that challenging place, he actually perseveres and becomes tremendously successful because he goes from a place of darkness to light. But again, this also works the other way around, which is when you're talking about the holiness, we start from a place of holiness, of light, and then we get to the ultimate. And what's the ultimate? The ultimate is there's no light. The ultimate is we don't understand. It's beyond us. Even if you think about science, you have light, and then you have a black hole. And the black hole, the dark energy is much stronger than the light, right? It's just that we don't perceive it that way because of the force of the gravity. But the bottom line is things that are beyond my ability to understand. There's many ways to think about it. One way to think about it, if I look at the sun, I'm blinded. Too much light makes me lose my ability to see at all. So I'm overwhelmed, right? So with God, it's the same thing. I start out with the holiness, which is my soul senses God. But then I have to become the idea of humility, that I understand that God is beyond me. And that's where we're moving to. So like I said, what's interesting is when we're praying, there are multiple things happening together at once. And therefore, there are multiple ways of looking at prayer. You could look at the order of prayer, morning, afternoon, evening, meaning going from the light to the dark, or you could look at it from moving from dark to the night, from dark to light. And that is because when it comes to all natural phenomena, the order is like creation. First dark, first confusion, first disorder, and then you move to holiness and order. That's in the natural realm. In the holy realm, it's the opposite. You start with light, and then you go to a place that's beyond light. So there's things beyond that I have no capacity to understand. And when we pray, we do both. Why do we do both? Because there's two parts of us praying. We're making room for our godly soul and for our animal soul. For our natural soul, which that's the model of night to day, we also make room for the godly soul, which is day to night. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. A lot more to say. God willing, we'll have an opportunity to continue this discussion, but that's it for today, I think. Wonderful day, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Patty, for coming.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, take care.
Okay.